This video shall contain my criticisms of the competitive viability of Mighty Fight Federation. Mighty Fight Federation is being advertised as a competitive arena fighter, and as someone who is passionate about the competitive viability of arena fighters, I had to try out Mighty Fight Federation to see how much of the competitive aspect it got right. I'm sad to admit that this game falls into a lot of the shortcomings of arena fighter game design. It also falls victim to a few questionable mechanics as well. My goal with this criticism video is to address everything that I find to be a hindrance to this game reaching competitive viability. Allow me to preface that this video comes from no ill will and that I only wish to use my competitive experience with arena fighters to provide feedback as thorough and objective as I possibly can. To address these issues, I'm going to use a formula of explaining the issue, providing examples of other arena fighters or fighting games, then sharing what I would change personally. Without further ado, let's take a deep look into Mighty Fight Federation. The first issue is that Mighty Fight Federation lacks a universal gap closing mechanic. This is by far the most important mechanic an arena fighter can have. Almost every arena fighter that has a universal gap closing mechanic has the potential to be competitively viable. On the contrary, any arena fighter that does not have a universal gap closing mechanic is almost guaranteed doomed from the start to lack any competitive viability at all. The reason the universal gap closing mechanic is so important to an arena fighter is because without them, arena fighters are inherently very defensive games. In arena fighters without universal gap closing mechanics, it's very easy to just walk away or camp high ground because the opponent has no way to get in and stop any of these tactics. Freedom of movement is an arena fighter's biggest selling point, but also its biggest drawback if nothing is designed to compensate for how strong free movement really is. In my opinion, the best example of a universal gap closing mechanic in an arena fighter is One Piece Grand Adventure's Block Dash. The reason I appreciate One Piece Grand Adventure's Block Dash mechanic so much is because you can act at it with anything except blocking. This is very good design because even though it makes the Block Dash a very strong universal gap closing mechanic, it makes it an offensive commitment that doesn't allow any defensive options besides jumping. This is important because despite players now being able to gap close on zoning characters, the vulnerability on the Block Dash makes it so zoning characters can still stuff their opponent's approaches. My suggestion for Mighty Fight Federation is that it should include a universal gap closing mechanic that doesn't allow the ability to roll during it. This will allow players to get in on people running away while locking the player out of their iframes, giving pros and cons to the approach option. On an issue related to arena fighters being too defensive, some of the moves in Mighty Fight Federation, like Dark Original's Jump X, can be abused because there's no limit on what direction she can go with it. The solution to this would be borrowing a page from Power Stone. In order to combat running away, Power Stone included a feature that made it so any attacks that weren't jabs would automatically target the opponent. For my suggestion, this doesn't have to be borrowed completely from Power Stone, only on moves that cover too much distance and are too abusable, such as Dark Original's Jump X should have this limitation. Movement speed is the last thing I want to bring up for the free movement. My last suggestion is that characters could move faster when walking towards other characters. This is a small overlooked feature in One Piece Grand Adventure that allows slower characters to keep up with some of the faster characters in the game. I'm not sure how well this would work in Mighty Fight Federation, but it would be an additional buff to the ability to approach. Rolls are another issue in Mighty Fight Federation that would benefit from a rework. In their current state, rolls don't influence your movement at all and can be acted out of at any time. This design causes them to feel spammy, especially when used by a player on the run, and the lack of any commitment gives it too much power. It makes you invincible at the cost of nothing, which is why for this game in particular, I would borrow from Super Smash Bros. Dodging in the Smash series allows you to pick from two options, a sidestep and a directional roll. The sidestep has less intangible frames, but in return, it requires far less commitment. The directional dodge benefits from more intangibility frames and creating distance from the opponent, but the end lag makes it easy to react to by a patient opponent. My suggestion for Mighty Fight Federation is to rework the dodge to function similarly to Smash, with a dodge in place and a directional roll dodge. The directional dodge could cover a fair amount of distance, but have enough time to be punished by an opponent dashing in if they react to it. This system would be more dynamic and reward patience on players pressuring their opponents by allowing them to outplay defensive maneuvers. This game would also benefit from having intangibility shown clearly via a visual effect such as the character flashing white while they are intangible. This roll system, I believe, could also play a role in the wake-up system, which feels pretty limited at the moment. To borrow from Smash again, I believe wake-ups could benefit from using a system of a quick neutral wake-up, a directional roll away, or a wake-up attack. In the game's current state, waking up feels incredibly budget due to the limited options and intangibility frames you have after getting up from a hard knockdown. Borrowing a system like Smash's could go a long way in mending this. Next, I want to tackle the issue with projectiles and zoning. The projectiles themselves only have pretty basic issues. A lot of them aren't practical to use in actual matches because they lack enough damage, hit stun, and/or knockback to be worth using. Most of the projectile moves also lock the character in a ton of end lag. Projectiles in fighting games are typically used to control space, but for most characters in Mighty Fight Federation, it just isn't possible due to the lack of reward from landing them and the recovery frames that follow. Even if some strength was breathed into projectiles, a much larger issue would continue to make them underwhelming in competitive play. This issue comes from the ungodly amount of aim assist in this game. Your character will automatically snap to your opponent's direction when you input an attack if you are facing in what feels like 180 degrees in their direction. This is extremely undesirable in an arena fighter because you will need to aim your projectiles preemptively as to where you think your opponent will be because of the free movement in this genre. Aim assist can still be a worthwhile inclusion, but with too much it'll feel incredibly limiting, and with none at all you lose some of the much needed precision in the game. I would suggest the aim assist needs to be at most an angle of 15 degrees. Before I finally get into the combo and meter criticisms, I'll quickly mention the turn rate. Turning in this game doesn't snap your character in the direction you want to go, rather they must completely turn to face that direction. Even though it only takes a split second to completely turn, this can create a problem of not being able to swiftly turn around and fend off an attack from behind, especially if the aim assist is nerfed. A non-existent turn rate I feel is the best solution as it's the most responsive to control, and responsiveness is important in a competitive fighting game. Combos have the most potential in Mighty Fight Federation, but they are plagued with some issues that are weighing down how much better they could be. There are infinites everywhere in Mighty Fight Federation if you disregard combo breakers, when it doesn't even have to be this way. These infinites are either jab infinites, launcher infinites, or wall bounce infinites. Jab infinites could be removed by tweaking the hit stun or end lag, but launchers and wall bounces will need a bit more creativity. My personal suggestion is just like ground bounces, launcher hits and wall bounces should be limited to a certain amount in one combo. However, all of these including ground bounces could use the third hit as the hard knockdown rather than the fourth hit. This could give a full combo a healthy amount of length and require more thoughtful use of the arena to get the most out of your combos. It would change this Heckbane combo into something more creative like this. The third wall bounce could cause a wall splat where the character slides down with intangibility, and a launcher's third hit could cause an air tumble with intangibility until they land on the ground, with both of these outcomes leading into some kind of wake-up game like mentioned earlier. Another issue with the combos is the damage scaling. Take CEO Shift X for example. If I use this move raw and I get a wall bounce off of it, I'm set up for a combo that will do a decent amount of damage because it at max only hit them 2 times. However, using his Shift X with a charge on him brings the maximum amount of hits up to 18, and any combo that follows it will do insignificant damage compared to the alternative because of how brutal the damage scaling is. Even as a combo finisher, it racks up too many hits to be a viable option. I have a few different suggestions for the combo damage scaling. First, damage scaling could be removed entirely. If infinites are removed, this can become a more viable option, but it will remove the strategy of combo pathing. Second, damage scaling could have a hard cap so that it will no longer degrade past a certain percentage of health. Like an attack in a combo could never go below 60% of the move's original damage as an example. Third, damage scaling could be reworked to be based on the total damage dealt in the combo rather than hits, or it could be a combination of the two. I personally prefer the second suggestion as it keeps damage in combos relevant without removing the reward of landing your damaging moves first to get the max possible reward out of your combo. Hype attacks could also have either massively reduced damage scaling compared to normal attacks in my opinion. Finally, in my honest opinion, I feel as if meter and combo breakers are the most unsatisfying part of the game, particularly combo breakers. Meter in this game doesn't reward players like it does in most fighting games. The player taking damage will gain more meter than the player who won neutral, which can lead to the better player feeling like the game is working against them to give the losing player a fighting chance, with an advantage they only receive by playing worse. Meter also builds extremely fast in this game, which results in a ton of combo breakers, and combo breakers are easily the weakest part of Mighty Fight Federation in my opinion. Unlike most other combo breakers in fighting games, Mighty Fight's combo breakers have an incredibly cheap cost of one quick building bar of meter, send out an incredibly large wave that stuns the opponent that has no delay and barely any counterplay, and can be acted out of instantly, giving the player who got hit the ability to turn around and do full combo. Even if the combo breaker wasn't inexpensive, this is not a healthy implementation of a combo breaker mechanic. If two players with a considerable amount of meter get into a close range battle, the game turns into what I can only describe as a clown fiesta. An example of a combo breaker mechanic done exceptionally well would be Guilty Gear Xrd's burst system. Guilty Gear Burst can be game-changing, but only when used intelligently. They can stop an opponent's combo dead in its tracks, but you don't get them often, perhaps 2 to 3 times in a match, even if it goes to round 3. They also have a considerable amount of counterplay. The bursts have a delay that lets players with keen eyes burn meter and punish, or allows players to bait them out and react accordingly. This burst meter is an entirely separate meter in Guilty Gear Xrd, which gives it a fixed function as a comeback mechanic. My suggestion for Mighty Fight Federation's meter is to slow the rate it builds and have it favor the player dealing the damage. Since Hype Factor already functions as a combo breaker, I would suggest removing the normal combo break from the game entirely and repurposing Hype Factor as a comeback mechanic on a separate bar of meter, similar to Guilty Gear. The combo breaker on Hype Factor would benefit from some added delay and the ability to act out of it removed, making it function only to reset the neutral game. With Hype Factor reworked into a separate meter, Hype Attacks could also function as the 2-bar super rather than the once a stock super to reward players saving up meter. As one quick final suggestion, I think the game could benefit from some form of movement in the arenas to fully bring out that arena fighter aesthetic. Something as simple as a wall jump could add just that little bit of dynamic movement to the game. Just make sure it's a single wall jump or it could end up like this game. That concludes my critique of Mighty Fight Federation. I hope I was able to articulate my thoughts and suggestions clearly and bring more light to arena fighter game design. I'll be following Mighty Fight Federation in its early access state and only wish the best for its future and its developers. Thanks for watching.